It was a real pleasure to talk with everyone at IOEA this morning. I'm a little bit of a different sort of a scholar here. I'm a historian of the United States and focus on the evolution of regulatory institutions and strategies of regulatory governance. So I talked a bit in the lecture about how historians ask questions and do research very differently from most institutional economists. But in my case, I also borrow quite a lot from the conceptual categories and insights from institutional economics. And what I did in the lecture was talk about that a little bit, and then also provide an example of synthetic macro history. So I explored from a very broad level, key trends in the evolution of American regulatory institutions and approaches to regulatory governance over roughly the last 45 years, with a bit of a peek at the generation before that. And most people, when they think about the period since 1980 in the United States, think about that as an era of deregulation, and I think that's accurate, but also only partially accurate. So I discussed in some length across during the lecture ways in which American policymakers have pulled back from older regulatory strategies, especially in what used to be thought of as public utility sectors like communications, finance, transportation, energy. I also explored new kinds of institutional checks on regulatory decision-making from the judiciary, from the executive, and from the legislative branches in the United States, both at the national and to a lesser extent at the state level, which have constrained regulatory decision-making to a significant extent. I talked about contexts in which when there has been regulatory action in the last 40 to 50 years, the focus has increasingly been to enhance market performance rather than to constrain market choices. Even creating new markets, as with cap and trade frameworks around the emission of carbon into the atmosphere. I also discussed the growing reliance on quasi-public or private regulators as opposed to state regulatory agencies. For all of that, that's not the whole story, and I also explored a number of contexts which you might think of as counter movements or counter currents in which regulation has actually expanded, often in the wake of major crisis events like 9/11, which produced enormous activity with regard to transportation security, or after the 2008 financial crisis, which prompted quite a lot of new financial regulation. I noted that the developments at the state level were very different from those sometimes at the national level, with democratic states pushing forward more aggressive regulatory action in areas like climate change, where there was very little action at the national level, and then also explored ways in which American interaction with global institutions and other countries have also fostered greater regulatory action. And then finally looked at areas, especially from conservatives, where their concerns about morality or difference among some populations has driven very vigorous regulatory action, just not on the basis of technocratic expertise. So it's a mixed picture, it's a complicated picture, and partly, and this is the last point, reflects a profound ambivalence in public opinion in the United States, where for the last many decades there has been decreased trust in government, decreased trust in regulatory institutions writ large, a desire to cut the overall amount of regulation when asked that way, but also strong support for specific regulatory action in areas like the environment, workplace safety, or consumer protection.